Gold has always been more than a mineral in Sudan. Before the conflict started in 2023, it was the country's economic lifeline, accounting for more than half of its exports. But now it has become a currency of war. Mining and the gold trade are bankrolling both sides of the conflict. Sudan is one of Africa's leading gold producers, with deposits found across the northeast, the central and southern regions. In the northeast, the army controls most of the mines. The central and southern goldfields are dominated by the paramilitary group, the Rapid Support Forces. Despite the fighting, production has increased, most of it extracted through artisanal and small-scale mining. In 2022, Sudan exported 41 tons of gold, worth $1.5 billion. In 2024, exports grew by more than a third, reaching 64 tons. More than 90% of Sudan's legal gold exports end up in Dubai. But much of the country's gold never makes it to official markets. The charity Swissaid estimates that 50 to 70% is smuggled out each year. And according to the United Nations, the RSF alone produced 10 tons in 2024, earning roughly $860 million from the mines it controls. The war has created the world's largest humanitarian crisis, forcing more than 14 million people from their homes. And as gold continues to flow out of Sudan, so too are its people, searching for safety and future their country can no longer afford to give. Hamza Mohammed, Al Jazeera.
Justin Lynch is the Managing Director of Conflict Insights Group, which has been monitoring the Sudanese gold trade. He joins us now from Brussels. You will have, I'm sure, lots of insight into gold mining and gold exports in Sudan. The EU Council, in establishing this ban, pretty explicit. It said in a statement, gold has become a key source of revenue sustaining the conflict in Sudan. How long has this been the case, do you think, and what is the EU hoping to achieve by this ban?
Well, really, it's been going on for a long time. Sudan has been one of the largest gold producers in Africa for years and decades. I think what the EU is trying to do is really solve a problem of trying to do something for itself, and it really has achieved that. What it won't do is solve the conflict. None of the gold that is produced goes to Europe directly. As the previous segment said, all of the gold, most all of it goes to the UAE directly, and then from there, you can try and trace where it goes. But if there was any effort by the EU to trace where the gold goes after the UAE, then it could be effective. But there isn't really any effort, and so really this will have no impact at best, and really at worst, it actually could make things worse.
Oh dear. Well, it begs two questions. If it's been going on for such a long time, and it's been clear where revenue from gold has been going in terms of the conflict, why is this only happening now? And the other question, of course, is how effective do they think it will even be, this ban, not in terms of the war necessarily, but in terms of tracing this gold, in monitoring whether it's in fact being impeded at any point. There are so many places gold can go.
Absolutely. I think you really made the really important point. Second there is how to monitor this, right? And what, the EU and what Western nations do really well is they actually monitor and report and force companies to actually say, who they're buying gold from. And look, I was talking with gold traders today, and I think what the EU is trying to do is what we're all trying to do, which is try and stop gold flows, and we're trying to stop illicit gold sales, right? But unfortunately, Sudan's gold industry is not going to stop overnight, right? These gold traders just aren't going to pack up and leave. And so what we need to do is try and formalize the sector, try and bring some transparency, and as you said, monitor, right? And so, that happens with, higher standards, like the stuff that the EU and Western nations have. And so I think that it's a bit counterintuitive, but when you bring in these standards, you can bring in more, sunlight, and you can actually say, hey, look, this is who is actually selling the gold, and you can, say, and you can show that the Sudanese government and the rapid support forces, this is how much they're buying, and this is who they're buying it from, and this is who is supporting both sides of the war.
Well, I should point out at this stage the UAE denies any involvement in the trade of Sudan's gold. You said something interesting a moment ago in the first question. You said this was something the EU was in part doing for itself. Is this an effort to show that the international community, the EU in this case, is taking now an interest after what is happening in El Obeid, around the besieged city of El Obeid, that now is under a severe risk of falling potentially to RSF forces? A repeat, the UN warns, of El Fasher last year. Is this a little bit of a self-serving show of interest in the conflict now?
Well, whether or not that's the stated objective, that's certainly, the underlying objective here is to do something. And look, I think the real issue here is that there's not a lot of leverage that states like Europe have, states like Europe, the US, and the UK have, beyond, trying to be upfront and confrontational with the UAE. When you speak with diplomats who work on the Sudan file, their task is trying to get their states to take the role of the UAE in Sudan seriously, and to try and get their states to confront the UAE to end their role. And they all admit that they're failing, right? And so short that, states are trying to think of a solution, and there aren't a lot of good options. And so there are these options, there are these feel-good, half mechanisms that don't really have an impact. And this is what we're kind of, left with are things that at work, at kind of best don't help, and at worst can make the situation worse.
Justin Lynch, Managing Director of Conflict Insights Group, joining us from Brussels. Many thanks for your time.